In the year 60 AD, on the wild plains of Britannia, the land we now know as Britain, a Roman army stood waiting in silence. Their commander, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, had gathered every soldier he could muster, roughly 10,000 men, including troops from Legio Forgemina, detachments of Legio Fenti, Valeria Victrix, and whatever cavalry and auxiliary forces were close enough to join him. They all understood the danger that was approaching. Along the distant horizon, a rising cloud of dust signaled the advance of a massive coalition of native tribes. This great host was led by Boudicca, the queen of the Iceni, who rode at the head of her warriors in a war chariot. She had complete confidence in victory, and understandably so. The tribal army outnumbered the Romans by a vast margin, at least 8-1. Yet beneath that excitement and confidence lay a harsh truth many of her warriors chose not to confront. Years before the uprising, Rome had forcibly disarmed several tribes. As a result, despite their numbers, thousands of men now marched into battle with little more than improvised weapons, far inferior to the armor, helmets, and steel of Rome's trained legionaries. Before the tribes charged into combat, they placed their supply wagons and their families behind the battlefield, expecting them to witness what they believed would be an overwhelming triumph. No one realized that this simple, harmless gesture would soon become the cause of a devastating tragedy. Before we move on, we would love to hear from you. If this part of the story reminds you of something you once studied, or if you first learned about Boudicca many years ago in school, feel free to share that memory in the comments. Your stories help keep history alive, not just for us, but for everyone watching. As the thick cloud of dust rose from the advancing Britannic warriors sweeping across the plains, Paulinus understood immediately that he had little time left. He had gathered his army under urgent circumstances, pulling together every unit of Legio Forgemina, recalling the vexia of Legio Ventio Valeria Victrix, and summoning whatever cavalry and auxiliary troops could be reached. Altogether, he had barely 10,000 men, a painfully small number compared to the great force rushing toward him. Yet where many commanders might have panicked at such a sight, Paulinus remained calm, the kind of calm shaped by decades of hard campaigns. He selected a narrow piece of ground, pinched between thick woods and tangled undergrowth. The approach into this position was only wide enough for a limited number of troops to advance at once. Behind the Roman line stood a natural wall of trees and uneven terrain, preventing any enemy infantry or cavalry from easily circling behind them. For a Roman commander, this location was a priceless advantage. It protected the rear and both flanks, ensuring that Paulinus would not have to fear being surrounded. More importantly, it forced the enemy to attack straight ahead. A massive army, once squeezed into a confined front, could no longer unleash its full strength. Numbers became a burden rather than a blessing. Warriors could only charge forward in tight layers, jostling and pushing one another, exactly the kind of chaos Paulinus expected. Meanwhile, Boudicca's army, though immense, suffered from a serious disadvantage. Many tribes had been disarmed by the Romans years before, so most of the warriors fighting in this rebellion had poor equipment. They lacked proper armor, lacked helmets, lacked sturdy shields. The Romans, in contrast, stood in uniform armor with broad shields, steel helmets, and the short, sharp swords they knew so well. They fought in formation, by rank, by signal, all things Paulinus understood the tribes could not match. And so, even while outnumbered 8-1, Paulinus believed victory was within reach, as long as his men held their line. At the head of her own vast force, Boudicca rode her war chariot with the bearing of a revered leader. She called out to her warriors, reminding them of the humiliations the Romans had inflicted on her family and on her people. According to the historian Tacitus, her words were filled with pain, fury, and a vow of retribution. Paulinus answered his men with a much shorter speech, but no less forceful. He reminded them that the enemy before them was not a professional army. They were loud, fierce, but disorganized. Rome had beaten them before and could do so again. He ordered his soldiers to hold the line, wait for the command, and when the moment came, use their broad shields and short swords to break the will of their opponents. Both armies, each stirred by their own leader's call, now stood fully prepared. Nothing remained between them except the narrow stretch of ground that would soon be stained with blood. When the distance between the two armies shrank to just within javelin range, the Britannic war chariots surged forward. Their light frames and spinning wheels tore across the ground, racing along the Roman line as the warriors atop them hurled spears and stones toward the front ranks. The grinding of iron rims, the shouts of the charioteers, and the thud of missiles slamming into Roman shields filled the air with chaos. Yet despite the noise and violence of the assault, the Roman line held firm. Their broad shields, metal helmets, and uniform armor absorbed most of the impact. The legionaries did not break formation, did not chase, did not panic. When the chariots eventually pulled back to prepare for another run, they left behind a Roman wall that remained solid and untouched. That calm, so sharply different from the fury of the rebels, unsettled many of the Britannic warriors. But not Boudicca. She raised her arm, and her entire host surged forward like a flood. Battle cries echoed across the open field. Tens of thousands of tribal fighters charged toward the Roman line in a wave of raw momentum. They trusted their numbers. They trusted their anger. They trusted the voice of their queen. But just as they closed in, Paulinus gave the signal. The Roman ranks unleashed their pila, heavy javelins designed to punch through shields and wreck formations. A storm of iron struck the leading wave of Britannic warriors. Crude shields shattered, men stumbled and fell. The ranks behind them crashed into those already wounded or on the ground, turning the advance into instant confusion. Before the rebels could recover, the Romans moved. Each unit shifted into sharp wedge formations, like blades cutting a path forward. These dense, disciplined blocks marched in unison, pushing straight ahead, sliding through gaps, and driving deep into the packed mass of tribal fighters. To the warriors in front, it felt as if a giant machine was forcing its way into their bodies. No room to spread out, no space to maneuver. Every Roman step forward became a forced step backward for the rebels. Within the crowded sea of Britannic fighters, the excitement of the charge turned quickly into suffocation. Those in the rear shoved forward. Those in front could not retreat or even lift their arms. Cries of panic, labored breathing, and the sound of bodies pressing together began to rise. The advantage of overwhelming numbers, the very thing they believed guaranteed victory, was now turning into the trap that held them in place. As the Roman wedges kept pressing forward, tens of thousands of Britannic warriors were forced to retreat step by step, trying to escape the advancing wall of shields and swords. But directly behind them stood the long line of wagons carrying their families, placed there so their loved ones could witness the victory they believed was certain. The space between the battlefield and those wagons quickly became so crowded that there was no room left to escape. Warriors who wanted to fall back were pushed forward by the masses behind them. Those trying to move toward the Romans were crushed by the legionaries' tight, unyielding formation. Within moments, the entire sea of fighters was trapped in a narrow strip of land. There was no room to spread out, no room to regroup, no room even to turn their bodies. Every step backward became another step gained by the Romans. Every man who fell only caused more confusion as the ranks behind stumbled and piled upon them. No space to run, no space to reorganize, no space to breathe. And it was in this moment of chaos that things grew even worse. From both sides of the battlefield, the Roman cavalry suddenly appeared, lowering their long lances as they charged into the gaps created by the infantry wedges. When the horsemen struck, they did not meet a prepared army. They met a mass of Britannic warriors so tightly packed and disoriented that they could not even lift their shields or weapons in time. The blows delivered from horseback shattered what little structure remained. Men fell and were trampled. The wounded could neither retreat nor stand. What had already been a suffocating crush now became a deadly trap. At the front, the Roman infantry continued their steady push. From the sides, the cavalry pressed in, and behind the Britons, the wagons meant for their families now formed a solid wall that sealed off any hope of escape. Once the Roman encirclement closed, the rebellion's resistance ceased to resemble a battle at all. It became a desperate struggle for survival among countless bodies, packed into a space too small to contain them. The Romans, well drilled in such situations, tightened the noose and kept advancing. Tacitus described the scene without softening a single detail. Not only warriors, but also women and children, standing near the wagons, were swept into the slaughter. Even pack animals and wagon horses were killed, simply for being too close to the fighting. The recorded casualties were staggering. Around 80,000 Britons died on that field. The Romans, by comparison, lost only about 400 men, an almost unbelievable imbalance, yet one that perfectly illustrates what happens when a massive but poorly equipped army is trapped, disorganized, and overrun by a disciplined force using superior tactics. Boudicca, witnessing the ruin of her people, fled the battlefield. Roman accounts say she later took poison, though other sources claim she fell ill and died naturally. Whatever the truth, her life ended in the aftermath of that devastating defeat. The Romans prevailed thanks to stronger equipment, tighter formations, greater battlefield experience, and, above all, the tactical skill of Paulinus, who chose the right ground at the right moment and used it in the right way to neutralize the enemy's overwhelming numbers. When the shouts of battle finally faded, the plains of Watling Street were left in a haunting silence. The bodies of Britannic warriors lay in great heaps, stretching all the way to the line of wagons where their families had waited. Even the Roman soldiers, hardened by years of brutal campaigns, needed a moment to grasp the scale of the devastation their small force had inflicted. For Rome, this was a decisive victory. They had crushed the largest uprising ever to ignite in Britannia. The rebels' center of power was lost, their fighting strength obliterated. With no leaders left, no manpower to reorganize, and no ability to gather another army, large-scale resistance collapsed almost immediately after the battle. The imbalance in casualties, 80,000 dead Britons versus only 400 Romans, made even the surviving legionaries realize they had witnessed something almost unheard of in a soldier's lifetime. A battle where losses fell overwhelmingly on one side. For Queen Boudicca, the defeat ended any hope of driving Rome from her homeland. She left the battlefield with a small group of loyal followers. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, she later chose to end her life with poison, though Dio Cassius wrote that she fell ill and died not long afterward. Whichever account is true, her story ends in tragedy, a symbol of rebellion, a mother who endured deep personal suffering, and a leader who led tens of thousands into their final battle. The Battle of Watling Street became a powerful lesson for both sides. For the Romans, they witnessed the power of choosing the right ground. They saw the value of discipline, tight formations, and superior equipment. They learned that a smaller army, if well positioned and well trained, could overcome an enemy many times its size. For the native tribes, their lack of uniform weapons and organization proved fatal. Sheer numbers and emotional fervor were no match for a professional army. Positioning their families and wagons behind the battlefield turned their escape route into a deadly trap. After the battle, Rome tightened its control over Britannia. Resistance never vanished completely, but no uprising in the following decades ever matched the scale or influence of the revolt led by Boudicca. Watling Street is often remembered as one of the most overwhelming victories the Roman Empire ever achieved. It demonstrates the absolute value of sound strategy, disciplined formations, and a commander with a clear vision. With only 10,000 troops, Paulinus shattered a massive army and extinguished a rebellion that threatened Rome's hold on the island. To many historians, it stands as a perfect example of a simple truth. A small, well-trained army that uses the terrain wisely can overcome almost any disadvantage in numbers. And it is this truth that makes the Battle of Watling Street an unforgettable landmark in the history of ancient warfare. If today's story gave you a quiet moment to reflect, a moment to think about history, about people, about courage, and the choices that shape our destiny, then we warmly invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what moved you, or what you once learned about Rome, about Boudicca, or about the great battles that still echo through time. Every comment you leave becomes a precious piece of the past, helping history not only to be retold, but to be remembered. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We hope to see you again in the next story from the long journey of human history.